Good afternoon. Back by popular demand and in video form once again. I come to you today, August 6, 2025, in slightly more casual attire than previously, from the annual summer Poulter family vacation at an undisclosed location on one of the Great Lakes. I'll give you a hint though. It's the Great Lake, which surface area is 2,000 square miles larger than the state of Israel. I think that puts it into perspective far more than the size of New Jersey. And while once again this video is presented in speak-read format, I will do my best to minimize such tedium and to engage with the camera as much as possible. I urge you to indulge me. You won't regret it. Before I begin, I feel it's important to make the following 3 brief disclaimers as follows. By now you should be familiar with me and my preemptive disclaimers. 1. Repeat my thematic mantra throughout my podcast series, a mantra that is imperative to be hammered into my viewers' heads as follows. The bad are incorrigible and the stupid impervious. I repeat, the bad are incorrigible and the stupid impervious. 2. Barry Goldwater once brilliantly and magnificently quipped, extremism in defense of liberty is no vice, moderation in pursuit of justice is no virtue. 3. Piers Morgan is a duplicitous moron and loser. Let's begin. Considering my 5 previous podcasts, I'd like to do one on the general human condition. We'll begin with a lesson in Kabbalah, and to a lesser extent Chabad Hasidut. Thereafter, we'll put together the pieces vis-a-vis the first 5 podcasts. In Kabbalah, there's this idea that God created 4, let's call them types of organisms as follows. Domem, inanimate objects, for example, the rock. Tzomeach, vegetation. Chai, animals. Medaber, the human. Additionally, he created these out of 4, let's call them elements, as follows. Eish, fire. Ruach, wind. Mayim, water. Afar, earth. Now, from man's perspective, no doubt Medaber, or man, is atop the food chain. But believe it or not so from God's perspective. Let me explain. When God created the universe, he was forced to contract to allow space for the world to come into existence. There is a notable argument between the 17th and 18th centuries greats, the Ramak and the Gra, and the Ramak's student prodigy, the Arizal, regarding this contraction and how it occurred. While I will not endeavor here to spell out or elaborate any further, as for our purposes the distinction is mostly irrelevant, suffice it to say that regardless to which opinion one subscribes, God, according to all opinions, was not satisfied with mere contraction and was forced to make further modifications so that this world could come into existence instead of being snuffed out by his incandescent light, otherwise known as Shvirat HaKelim, vessel fragmentation. Thus, once he contracted, he installed the following sophisticated filtration system. First, interestingly, another division of 4 worlds, in descending order as follows. Atzilut, emanation. Bria, creation. Yetzirah, formation. Asiyah, action. Our world, our universe, or more simply put, Earth. Each of these worlds further contains 10 sfirot, manifestations or attributes of God, although in Kabbalah you will find that primary focus is given to only 7 of 10. This is because the first 3 are too far removed, as these relate to God's cerebral powers, whereas the remaining 7 are referred to as midot, or character traits, for example, kindness or mercy, strength or severity, beauty, victory, etc. There is as well a sophisticated filtration system above these worlds, including Keter, or crown, that is further divided into 2, Atik and Arich. And then above that, there is Adam Kadmon, or primordial man, Once again, for purposes of this podcast, there's no need to elaborate on these any further, as they're mostly beyond the pale of this lecture. All this said, however, it should be self-apparent that from God's perspective, the order of the four forms of life is as listed: domem, inanimate, first; medaber, human, or literally speaker, last, the very opposite of man's. Because for a being that is fully sentient and fully aware of his ego and his faculties to have come into existence, it must be farthest removed from God. No way could it have otherwise. Therefore, while to us it appears the rock is at the bottom, in truth, in other words, God's perspective, the human is. Because the only reason the rock is that it's simply not fully baked, for lack of a better term, because while it comes at the tail end of God's sophisticated filtration system, it is the first item or creation that comes thereafter, and therefore it is a rock. It has no sense of self. It is ultimate humility before its creator. Therefore we have vegetation, thereafter we have vegetation slightly more removed from God, and therefore slightly more organic, though still very primitive. Thereafter we have the animal, already living and breathing with some instinctual abilities too, again less nullified than the preceding form, vegetation, but more nullified before God than the next and final form, man. There is even proof for this. First, you will notice the Kabbalic acronym is not Machzad, man, animal, vegetation, inanimate, but rather the perfect opposite. Why? Because Kabbalah describes the order from God's perspective. Domim, or the rock, is nearer to God than is the human. Second, notice that all forms except for man are referred to by what they are. Conversely, man is merely referred to as medaber, the speaker. What comes to mind, therefore, is the morning prayer proverb, Umotar ha'adam hina be'ma ayin, ki hakol havel, levad haneshama hatohora. For the benefit of man over the animal kingdom is naught, except for his pure soul. In other words, the only physical benefit, if you will, of the raw man vis-a-vis the wild beast is the pure soul, which loosely expresses itself through speech. I see this so clearly in the primate species. It is an amazing species and one that mimics 97% of man's DNA, and it shows. Just YouTube Bibi the monkey, not the prime minister, and tell me he is not all human, if not more. Furthermore, the Midrash writes that when man becomes haughty or arrogant, we tell him to pipe down and not to get too supercilious, because Yitush Kodmach, even a mosquito, was created before you. You're a nobody. Additionally, I'd say that it's interesting to take notice of this list's bookends that are perfect opposites. Domem doesn't only mean inanimate, but it also means mute. Now, just as a fascinating sidebar, earlier I mentioned not just the four forms of life, but also the four elements or ingredients with which life was made, as follows: Eish, fire; Ruach, wind; Mayim, water; Afar, earth. You'll notice that in ascending order from earth to fire, we get the complete recipe for all four forms as follows. Domem, or the rock, really only or mostly requires Afar, earth, because that is after all what it is. Someach, or vegetation, really only or mostly requires two of the four, Afar, Umayim, earth and water. Then we have Chai, or animal, that requires three of four, Afar, Mayim, Ruach, earth, water, and wind, which here refers to air, not the meteorological form. The potential to breathe or live, at least semi-sentient. Finally, man requires all four, inclusive of the last element, the most significant, Eish, fire, which, as described above, refers to the holy, fiery soul. So then you might rightly ask, then what's the big deal with man? Why is he, after all, considered the pinnacle of God's creation? And the answer is that the only one of four that possess the wherewithal and ability to rise above the fray is man. That was God's intention with creating him to begin with. That man purify, polish, and promote himself within the framework of God's 10, or more specifically 7 attributes or character traits above mentioned, and thereby permeate the world as well with prominence and benevolence and its full potential, and thereby elevate God as well. Otherwise, what was the point of God creating man seems completely counterproductive. It is for this reason that we recite the seminal high holiday liturgical verse, Zehayom Tchilat Ma'asecha Zikaron Liyom Rishon. God says this day, Rosh Hashanah, the sixth day of creation, the day on which man was created, is the beginning of my handiwork, a remembrance to the first day. What does this verse mean? It simply means that this sixth day was the entire raison d'etre of creation. Man was first in God's mind, but not necessarily the first practically. The entire thesis is also the basis for the famous Chabad Hasidut proverb, Kol hagavoa gavoa yoter, yored lemata mata yoter. That which is highest falls lowest. The higher the source, the higher the root, the lower it falls. In other words, man, who is the highest of God's creation, naturally descends to the lowest abyss. And only through toil and effort and discipline, like I described above, is he in position to achieve his, and thereby God's, true raison d'etre. Until such time, however, man is scum of the earth, beneath the mosquito. This is the primary reason I take umbrage to many in the media or otherwise referring to certain questionable human beings as animals. You gotta be kidding me. Animals are far more refined than most humans. Even a lion, the so-called king of the jungle, if satiated, will not attack a living thing unless it sees it as a threat to its cubs. And a lion also has the basic Gemütlichkeit to kill his prey before devouring it. So now let's talk about this human of whom I speak quite derogatorily vis-a-vis current events. The dumb anti-Semite doesn't understand that 2,000 years of unbridled Jew hatred only proves and highlights a one God of Israel. Why, do you realize the probability of one people, the smallest by far in numbers, and the most harmless, being singled out 2,000 years for vitriolic hatred and derision? It is nearly impossible to think of such a species that endures a Holocaust roughly every century for 20 consecutive centuries. This is truly a miracle and can only come from God alone. Nature alone could have never engineered it. A while back, I coined an aphorism as follows. Until the year 2000, I accused the left of short-sightedness. Since then, I accuse it of farsightedness, a far greater evil. The left no longer has a platform. It no longer maintains any kind of decorum or decency or interest in a republic of any kind. It wishes purely for chaos, anarchy, and Armageddon. Not like yesteryear, when one may have suspected that at least its intentions were in the right place, only that it disagreed with the right on how to get there. Now it has devolved into merely pining for destruction, desolation, and devastation, for the mere sake of destruction, desolation, and devastation. Funny how back in 2000 I predicted the end of America, and I don't consider myself a prophet, just an ordinary man that possesses the God-given ability to read the writing on the wall and to decipher same. Friend witnesses at the time enjoyed a good laugh, and then in 2005 they'd continue to mock me and would continue to stick and stab me. And I was silent with a sheepish smile. And in 2010 the same, proud Titanic musicians. And then in 2015 something changed in their mocking tones, still mocking but not the same. Then in 2020 I didn't hear from them, and now in 2025 they're consulting with me about my opinion and anticipated direction for this country and the world at large, far from laughing anymore. 3 years ago, while sitting one afternoon on my late mother's home enjoying some mother-son quality time, while my eldest sister was present too, I quipped, "We are currently in Nazi Europe, 1936. While slightly more respectful than my above-mocking friends, internally they thought I was crazy or at least exaggerating. Well, my mother now knows the MS because she passed away since and now resides in the world of ultimate truth. And my sister isn't laughing anymore. I know none of these things because I'm some kind of genius or prophet. I'm merely a very astute student of history. So these things, whatever they are, don't fall below the right side of the Datzcham meter or spectrum. that is below Domem? No. That would be an elevation. That would be moving closer toward Yetzirah, the world above ours, the world above Asiyah, nearer to God. Rather, these miscreants move in the opposite direction to the far left of the Medaber, the speaker, side of the meter, into oblivion or the abyss, where the meter needle breaks and there's no hope for return or redemption. Stop saying man is basically good. He's not. While it is true that at his base, at his source, he is good, as more fully delineated above, he is not once he departs and becomes a fully sentient being. He falls so fast, so hard, and as we've just established, so low, even lower than the gnat, from so high a source, that he is scum of the earth with a brain, or soul. And that is his only saving grace. But if he chooses to ignore his only saving grace, he is less than worthless. A capuchin monkey is more valuable. A Tasmanian devil is more valuable. Like any domesticated or even undomesticated animal, a human must be tamed to thrive and prosper. If not, he is far more lethal than the untamed animal. The wretched, reprobate miscreant Jeremy Corbyn appears at a mosque in London to extol the virtues of the Muslims while slamming Israel and the Jews. Truth is, he despises the Muslim too, only his hate for the Jews is so great that his contrived love for Muslims is simply a matter of the lesser of the two evils. That pathetic Sinn Féin supporter is going to lecture Israel. No wonder that cheerleader of the IRA loves the Muslims because, as I said in my first YouTube podcast about another Irish scumbag, birds of a feather flock together. Recently, I watched a portion of a debate between the most awesome human Sir Douglas Murray, that's right, I just bestowed upon him knighthood, and some Muslim punk whose name escapes me and whose name in any event is irrelevant, regarding the 2015 Charlie Hebdo massacre. I found one exchange particularly interesting where the Islamic punk in essence justifies the brutality that befell the Hebdo journalists and cartoonists because they were racist. Murray counters his argument with the fact that Hebdo was the most inclusive and far left-leaning paper. I thought to myself, while Murray may be correct, that's not the response. The argument he should have made is who gives a damn? Everyone is free to be a racist. Too bad you don't like it. So long as the satire steers clear of incitement or fighting words, all's well, and to hell with you and your self-righteous cohorts. Ever watch my all-time favorite show, Family Guy? It is riddled with anti-Semitic humor and innuendo, and I eat it up. It is great stuff. Perhaps the reason it gets away with it is because it is equal opportunity humor and equally offensive. It mocks everyone and all denominations across the board, including blacks, Italians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Irish, Catholics, and so many more. It pulls no punches. Like Hebdo. But while the Jew hasn't changed in 1,000 years in gallantry, neither has the Muslim in ghoul. I quote Ethics of Our Fathers, Heve mitpalel b'shloma shel malchut she'ilmale mora'a ish et re'ehu chayim bla'o. Pray for the safety and goodwill of your government, or more specifically law enforcement, Mamdani. For if not for the people's fear thereof, man would consume his fellow man. Further proof that my thesis is accurate and spot on in that man is basically scum. Sad that in some instances nowadays we can't even rely on government or law enforcement, as either it is part of the problem and or it is so overwhelmed and overrun by scum and utterly helpless. It is further interesting to note that the proverb doesn't read man would kill his fellow man, rather it reads man would consume his fellow man. Case in point, October 7th. October 7th wasn't merely the worst display in the pantheon of time of man massacring man. As terrible as that would have been, I might have viewed Hamas simply as bad guys. But what occurred October 7th wasn't merely outright murder, it was in fact consumption of man. Of course, these losers feared no one and nothing because kamikazes fear nothing and no one, including death, as we sadly learned December 7th, 1941. If at all, it glorifies it. I guess the Mishnah couldn't have even fathomed such a depraved creature. Jews like Schumer, Schiff, Aaron Mate, and Max Blumenthal are even worse than the worst anti-Semites, simply awful individuals. They are the modern-day Judenrat or capos, or worse, because the former at least did so under threat of death. They all satisfy Rambam's definition of rodef and are therefore all relegated to the death penalty. See Rambam Laws of Mourning, Chapter 1, Law 10. Again, all far left of even Medaber speak. I even don't care for the so-called good Jews who mean well and protest in support of Israel. I detest all protesters on both sides of the aisle. It's simply foolish and a waste of time and energy. There's zero benefit in protesting. All it achieves is emboldening the other side, the side of evil. It gives that side a cause and draws attention. I'd ignore it totally. I don't see anyone demonstrating in support of daytime. When one counters protests, it elicits a sense of perhaps even a modicum of indecency or incongruence, to which a response is mandatory. But in the subject case, no response is mandatory. The pro-evil protests are the equivalent of protesting in support of nighttime. Would any decent human even think of counter-protesting in support of daytime? And just as an aside, to quote the great Billy Joel from his Leningrad lyrics, didn't Hamas hear we won the war? What are they fighting for? Don't you understand that Guy can't help himself? Don't you understand that short of rare exception, the righteous Gentiles like John Hagee, Doug Murray, son of Hamas, Bridget Gabriel, Tommy Robinson, and a few others whom you could probably all fit in my basement, Jew hatred courses through their veins like blood does yours and mine? Don't you understand that this is all God's plan since the Sinai moment? Don't you understand it's a halacha? Esav saneh Yaakov, Esau shall despise Jacob and will till end days? Don't you understand that if you showed the world a video of a 12-year-old Palestinian youth heaving rocks at Israeli children, causing the death of 2 and the severe maiming of a 3rd, followed by IDF gunfire that resulted in the death of the Palestinian thug, the media would ignore the first half altogether? It would attempt best to censor and edit out the first half, but certainly if it couldn't, would reluctantly play the entire episode, but would still criticize Israel alone for killing a poor Palestinian child. Rabbi Shmuley and others think he's going to educate the Goy. How foolhardy and sophomoric. Here's the deal. The Jew lover will be the Jew lover if Israel carpet bomb Gaza on October 8th, while the Jew hater will be a Jew hater if all 7 million Israeli Jews march today lockstep into the Mediterranean Sea. See YouTube clip exchange between the Lubavitch Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson of blessed memory, and the founder of the fiercely progressive Knesset Party, Peace Now. I will post the link in the description box below. And frankly, while I may agree with Neturei Karta that Zionism is not Judaism, and may further be in stark contrast and conflict with Judaism, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And those who see it otherwise are fools, morons, and suckers. And the Goy once again has succeeded in hoodwinking. Oddly, after October 7th, I find myself transforming from a staunch Kahanist, see October 7th podcast, part 1, to a Kartist. Neturei Karta, that is. Though perhaps not staunch just yet. I further believe that had Kahana been alive today, he'd have converted to the dark side as well. That said, however, this statement comes with a big caveat. Although aligned partially philosophically only, I would never align with that cursed demonic group in protest. Marching alongside your sworn enemy, that if in power would consume you as it would me, is simply horrific and disgusting. And for those who head this detestable group, including Weiss and Feldman, not to appreciate this from mere history is stunning and disturbing. So far as I'm concerned, the Torah Carta, like the left secular Jews above mentioned, has been relegated to the Rambam's definition of rodef, and according to halacha, therefore, condemned to death. All that said, however, strictly philosophically, it has sadly, over 80 years of hell, perhaps been proven not entirely incorrect. And regardless of my animus towards Zionism and the state of Israel on completely distinct grounds, mildly aligned with the NK, I must shout the truth as loud and as proud as I have in all my podcasts. And the truth is this: nothing you hear regarding the fallacious Gaza famine is true. Nothing. It is all a mirage, complete lies without so much as a shred of emes. And while I don't expect more from Code Pink or Schmuck Sanders or Kasparian, I do Megyn Kelly, who has sadly, as so many of her cohorts and contemporaries, have fallen prey, drank the Kool-Aid. Because tragically the left is likewise quite adroit at shouting loud and proud, and it apparently works, like the Himmler quote regarding how you get an entire people, and even continent or world, to ingest fabrications and bold-faced lies in my Part 1 podcast. For this reason, I make the very crucial point in previous podcasts that I do not lecture to the bad or stupid, but only to the good. And so don't ask why I preach to the choir, because I've now proven the answer to that. Apparently, it is an indispensable requirement, and while of course there is starvation in Gaza, first, not to the extent exaggerated in the media, and second, it has nothing, I repeat, nothing to do with Israel. I will not belabor this any further, only to say that perhaps Orwell's 1984 is the only possible Aufklärung for this madness. Candace Owens and Dan Bilzerian, whose only claim to fame is his vile, filthy, hedonistic life and lifestyle, who has not worked a day in his life and is nothing more than a spoiled brat, raised on a silver spoon, living off daddy's deep pockets to feed his poker play, a pastime I might add, at which he doesn't excel either. Or that Scotch-Irish pig O'Brien. I did it again, bad habit. Should never shame the pig in this fashion. Don't fall to the right of Medaber, are not demoted to chai or animal, for that would be a promotion. Rather, they fall to the left thereof, to nothing, into the abyss. God doesn't want to know of them and prefers they be more distant, not nearer. You see, in the pantheon of almost any bad or evil zeitgeist, here is how it unfolds. Here is its evolution. Mnemonic is Satan, S-A-T-A-N. Stun, acclimate, tolerate, accept, noxiously natural. This goes for homosexuality, transgenderism, male puberty blockers, nearly everything noxious, not the least of which is anti-Semitism. As far as modern history goes, pre-9/11 was the stun period for anti-Semitism, post was the acclimate period, then post-COVID began the tolerate period, and today we stand within eyeshot of acceptance, to be quickly followed by natural or normal. I don't mean to be cliche, but the world, inclusive of all its anti-Semites, ought to prostrate it and themselves to Israel and the Jews. In any event, if not today, it and they will tomorrow, for we are truly the first line, or not last, of defense. Israel's enemies are the enemies of everything good, civil, and peaceful. We Jews are merely the miner's canary, and I don't say so as a Jew, rather I say so as a historian. But that is how endemic, accurate, and truly sick and vile anti-Semitism is. It Jew hates more than it self-loves. I always thought a poignant and reasonable double question to be put to the anti-Semite is this. 1, does it ever get old? It's been 2,000 years. Does it ever get old? A Holocaust virtually every century, certainly according to James Carroll, author of Constantine's Sword. I ask you again, does it ever get old? Aren't you tired? 2, on a strict logical plane, in the end we always win. I'll grant you your short-term win, but long-term we've always won and will continue. We're going nowhere because that's God's plan. And if that hasn't been proven over 2,000 years, I'm not sure any plausible proof exists. In the appendices to my most recent publication, 2023, Tavlin 360, available at Amazon, you will find a worthwhile, lengthy anti-Semitism thesis in which I outline an A through I acrostic anti-Semitism causes profile. I wish herein to condense same and reduce it to two, although one may argue, as even I do in the reference thesis, that there may be as many as 7 or 8 causes for anti-Semitism that ebb and flow given the specific epoch, etc. Nonetheless, since I've written that thesis, I've thought hard and long, not unlike Einstein's unified field theory, on how to best unify, hone, and sharpen the anti-Semitism scourge into a single, or at most double catalyst, and I think I have. All other causes are merely derivatives or animations therefrom. And it goes like this. 1. The Jew is the class nerd. You recall the class nerd back in grade school? He was almost always the brightest and usually the teacher's pet, and for that he was kicked around. Nonetheless, whenever the bullies needed homework completed, we all know on whom they relied. The Jew stands out like a sore thumb in every respect. He is inordinately different than all people in so many ways, not merely physically, but spiritually, cerebrally, scientifically, and in almost every other facet and characteristic. While the world looks up at and to the Jew for guidance and counsel and hope and endurance, it simultaneously looks down at him with derision, contempt, and grave envy, not unlike the class nerd. On an aside, if this doesn't scream chosen, I don't know what does. 2, discreditation. Judaism discredits every other religion and or belief, and the world hates us for it. Certainly Christianity and Islam, and perhaps to a lesser extent Buddhism and Hinduism, do not disagree with Maimed Har Sinai. All agree that the Sinai event did in fact occur, and as reported in Torah. Each merely believes that since that time things have changed, that God in his omniscience decided to change course, whether with Jesus or Muhammad, etc. After all, these religions require Sinai to be rendered legitimate in the first place. Therefore, the Jew in Judaism is simply a thorn in their side, because all these religions in the deepest recesses of their consciousness know that Judaism is the first and only true religion, and so, as long as it exists, each of these are far from vindicated, and each is at least a semi-fraud. Why, think about it. Where to would logic dictate me to dispatch missionaries? China, with 1.2 billion inhabitants, of which the overwhelming majority is Buddhist? Or perhaps India, another 1.2 billion inhabitants, of which the overwhelming majority is Hindu? Or Israel, with a Jewish population of a pathetic 7 million? If I were a surveyor or a pollster, where would I go first and foremost? Where would I invest all or most of my proselytizing energy and resources? Any statistician would tell you your odds are far better anywhere in the world but Israel. So why then do we find a disproportionate presence of these lunatics in the streets of Jerusalem, incomparable to its numbers? Because all these religions know that each is as fraudulent as the next, and that fraud may challenge fraud. In other words, once they dispose of the Jew, they'll no doubt go after each other, either verbally or physically or both, but that's very secondary. First and foremost, the Jew and Judaism are the primary, if not exclusive, bane of the world religion's existence. They believe, as does the atheist, that so long as the Jew is removed, that as soon as the Jew is removed from the equation, and therefore emes silenced, they'll be free of a conscience, free of responsibility, accountability, decency, morality, and integrity. And while they're correct, they absolutely would be. Woe to such a post-apocalyptic world. I would have rather indeed been removed from the equation. All that said, all the above and even my more detailed, protracted thesis that appears in my book I referenced above, is the anti-Semitism of yore. Since October 7, 2023, I have witnessed, studied, and arrived at an entirely new strain of anti-Semitism the world has not yet seen. It is truly new and novel, and it's a beauty. And while other forms or causes of anti-Semitism, no doubt, still rear their ugly head as is expected, this one is most pronounced nowadays. You see, the world realized that it's time for something new. The Christ killer's wives' tale, and or the killing of Christian children for purposes of adding their blood to our Passover matzos, don't really fly anymore. These were great and primitive times. These were great in perhaps the year 325 or even 1725, not 2025. First, the world realized that these are foolish and sophomoric. Second, they're simply old and the world is tired of old. You see, in short, all the reasons and causes for anti-Semitism over the past 3,000 years were one of victimhood. In other words, the world will acknowledge that in every case, regardless, the Jew was clearly the victim. Only it came up with excuse after excuse to justify such victimhood, but victim nonetheless. Now comes what I have aptly coined October 7tism. And this is an entirely new and brilliant strain. Jews are no longer the victim. They are the perpetrator. It is brilliant because it so fits the world's general narrative in 2025. It is also brilliant because now finally it levels the playing field. Till now, the Gentile world had to look for justification. It no longer needs to resort to such complex machination. Now finally, says the world, the Jew is as bad as us. And on top of that, all the anti-Semitism over 3,000 years was as well justified, because now we clearly see who and what the Jew truly is and of what he is made. He is an aggressor, pillager, rapist, and is genocidal after all, just like us. Apparently our ancestors, in unleashing their wrath upon the Jew, knew this already back then. Even if the Jew didn't manifest same, it was always present. Perhaps just a matter of inability to exercise same until it gained sovereignty in 1948. One recent morning while surfing YouTube, I came across a video with the following title: Why Did Hitler Persecute the Jews? Posted by the channel named Der Kommandant. The video itself is historic in nature and quite enlightening. However, I urge all of you to read the comments right out of a 1936 copy of Chief Nazi propagandist Julius Streicher's Der Sturmel. Frightening? Sure. Surprising? Hell no. I will post the link in the description box below. And although I don't wish to plug another pathetically disgusting and morally broken YouTube channel, I feel it is incumbent upon me to do so merely to prove my point of how generic and endemic anti-Semitism is and how it rages still, perhaps louder than it raged in 1940 Europe. See comments to YouTube channel Born Again Barbarian. To minimize views or subs, however, I shall not post his link in the description box below. This is why the late, great Rab Meir the Prophet was fond of saying, quote, "You want to know what the guy really thinks of the Jew? Don't be fooled by office small talk or feigned cordial neighborly interactions and the like. Go to the bar, for there you shall hear the truth." Unquote. 1985 bar, 2025 social media. Our enemies and enemies of America and the West generally, many of which are sadly Jewish, including founders and purveyors of Code Pink, while all technically Midabrim speakers, are all lesser and truly dumber than the rock. Never again shame animals, vegetation, or even the rock. Any comparison to any of these organisms is simply unfair and untrue. Why the pig is far more civil and sublime then Hassan or Hijab, Owens or Carlson, Corbin or Bazarian, Finkelstein or Uger, Feldman or Weiss.